The event horizon shudders violently as it tears back into normal space. Proximity alarms shriek through the bridge, a chorus of mechanical panic. "Captain, we are reading massive energy fluctuations directly ahead." The science officer's voice is tight, controlled, but the tension is unmistakable. It is like nothing in our database. Ahead of them, at the very edge of the galactic core, space itself churns with impossible light. This is your guide to the final frontier's greatest mystery, the spectral entities known only as the ghosts. By the end, you will understand the terrifying truth of what lurks within the galaxy's heart and the fate of those who venture too close. What awaits them is not just an anomaly, but an intelligence from beyond time, a force that has consumed countless ships and left behind only echoes. What would you do if the void itself began to whisper your name? Captain Valerius gripped the armrest of his command chair, his knuckles white, run a full sensor sweep. "I want to know what we are looking at." For a moment, the bridge was silent except for the hum of the ship. Then the main viewer flickered, and the swirling nebula resolved into a horrifying new clarity. It was not a cloud of gas and dust. It was a forest of broken metal, a silent, sprawling junkyard stretching into infinity. The science officer's console lit up with a cascade of warnings, overloading as it tried to process the sheer scale of the data. "Captain, the readings are impossible. Every ship out there, from primitive fission-powered scouts to advanced quantum-drive cruisers, is emitting the exact same energy signature. It is a perfect match for the anomaly itself." The tactical officer turned, his face ashen. "It is a graveyard, thousands of them, maybe millions, wrecked ships from countless eras, all broadcasting the same ghostly signal." As he spoke, a new sound threaded its way through the comms system. It started as a faint static hiss, but then it resolved into something else, whispers. They were faint, layered over one another, a chorus of lost voices speaking in a dozen different languages, some ancient, some utterly unknown. They did not form words so much as feelings, a profound and lonely ache that seeped into the very air of the bridge. One voice, clear and mournful, seemed to rise above the others, a single word repeating like a heartbeat: "Come." Valerius felt a cold dread settle in his stomach, a primal warning screaming at him to turn the ship around and flee. But the whispers were a siren song, pulling at something deep within his own mind, urging him closer. He made his decision. "Helm, plot a cautious course towards the nearest derelict. I want to see one up close. The comms are to remain open. Let us hear what the ghosts have to say." The event horizon drifted like a mote of dust beside the colossal warship. Its hull was pitted with age, marked by sigils of an empire that fell when humanity was still discovering fire. The airlock hissed open, and Commander Lyra led her team into the absolute silence. Their bootsteps echoed in the cavernous main corridor, a sound swallowed by the sheer, oppressive weight of time. Every console was dark, every viewport vacant. It was a tomb preserved in the deep freeze of space. Lyra ran a gloved hand over a control panel, the dust undisturbed for millennia. There are no bodies. No blast marks, no evidence of any internal conflict. It is as if the entire crew simply stepped out. Her second-in-command, Jax, pointed his scanner down a branching hallway. "The readings are going crazy, Commander. It is not radiation, not anything we know. It is like the air itself is charged with memory." Then they saw them. Flickering silhouettes of light, translucent figures moving through the corridors in a silent, endless loop. One phantom stood at a navigation console, its hands moving over controls that were no longer there. Another walked through a solid bulkhead, repeating the same path over and over. "They are not ghosts in the superstitious sense," Jax murmured, his voice hushed. "They are energy echoes, imprints left behind, repeating their final moments like a recording." Lyra moved towards the bridge, the echoes parting around her without acknowledgement. She found the captain's chair, and standing beside it was the most defined phantom of all, a tall being with a stern profile. It was reaching for a comms panel. Jax adjusted his equipment, his fingers flying across the interface. "I am isolating the signal from this one. It is stronger, clearer. Maybe it was trying to send a final message." For a moment, the static on their suit comms cleared, and a voice, ancient and frayed with terror, whispered directly into their helmets, "They are not what they seem." The words hung in the air, a warning from across the ages. Lyra froze, her eyes locked on the empty chair. The statement unmoored everything. It was not a plea for help or a curse against an enemy. It was a clarification, a desperate correction. If the ghosts are not the threat, then what were her people hearing on their own ship? What was calling them closer, using these echoes as its lure? The graveyard around them was not just a collection of dead ships, but a web, and they had just landed squarely in the center of it. Back on the event horizon, the bridge lights flickered and died, plunging the crew into an emergency red glow. "Captain, we are being targeted by an energy surge of unprecedented magnitude. It is emanating from the galactic core itself." Valerius watched the main viewer as the graveyard of ships seemed to ripple, their ghostly forms twisting into new, impossible shapes. The chief scientist spun from his console, his face a mask of raw astonishment. "It is not an anomaly, sir. It is a wound, a dimensional rupture in the fabric of space-time, and it is actively pulling echoes from other timelines into our own. The very center of the galaxy is leaking, and what we are seeing are the afterimages of realities that never were." As he spoke, space around the event horizon tore open. Not with violence, but with a silent, shimmering iridescence. Through the rents, semi-transparent forms of ancient starships swarmed into view. These were not the derelicts of the graveyard. These vessels were phantoms from 100 different histories, their designs utterly alien, some built from crystalline structures that caught the core's light, others resembling vast, organic whales swimming through the void. They moved in a silent, chaotic ballet, passing through the solid wreckage and each other without a sound. One moment, a ship of polished bronze and solar sails drifted alongside their hull, close enough to see the ghostly outline of its crew on the bridge. The next, it dissolved into a shower of light, only to be replaced by a jagged craft of pure energy. The whispers in their comms swelled into a deafening chorus of overlapping voices, a cacophony of languages and screams and desperate final orders from civilizations long since turned to dust. The rupture is not just showing us the past, it is showing us every possible past, every lost future, all at once. The chief scientist's voice was barely a whisper. Every ship that ever vanished near the core, every vessel that might have existed in another reality, is being pulled through that tear. They are not ghosts of the dead. They are ghosts of the might-have-beens. So what is the core truly? Is it a natural cosmic fault line, a weak spot in the universe where dimensions grind against one another? Or is it something far more deliberate, a machine built by a forgotten god, or a living entity whose dreams are so powerful they physically manifest? And if these shimmering forms are just echoes, what happens when the rupture pulls something through that is not an echo at all, but something solid, something real, and something hungry? The Phantom Fleet convulsed into a new formation, the silent ballet of ghosts twisting into the brutal choreography of war. Ancient warships of impossible design locked into battle lines, their energy weapons glowing with a cold, malevolent light. They are firing on each other. The tactical officer's voice was strained, his eyes glued to the viewer as spectral cannons unleashed silent torrents of raw power. But the blasts are real, a volley of incandescent energy meant for a crystalline cruiser that had long since dissolved into memory, streaked past the event horizon's bow and slammed directly into a derelict freighter resting in the physical graveyard. The ancient ship did not just shimmer, it detonated in a violent, physical fireball, scattering molten metal across the void. The helmsman wrenched the controls, sending their own ship into a desperate evasive spiral. The ghosts are not just echoes anymore. When their timelines overlap with our reality, their weapons can touch us. We are caught in a crossfire from a war that ended before our son was born. This was no simple recording. It was a resonance event, a catastrophic overlap where the energy of a past reality briefly achieved solidity in the present. The fleet was reenacting its final, desperate battle, and the event horizon was now an uninvited guest on the battlefield. Each silent detonation of a phantom ship sent a shockwave of very real force through the local space, shaking wreckage that had rested undisturbed for eons. The chief scientist watched his console, his face illuminated by the flashes of ancient warfare. The energy signatures are perfectly coherent. When the Phantom's weapons fire intersects with a point in our space that is not already occupied by another strong energy field, the effect becomes physically manifest. It is like two ripples on a pond meeting and creating a single, powerful wave. What does it mean to witness a war that never truly happened in your own world? These ships, these crews, they fought and died for a cause lost to time, in a timeline that likely collapsed into nothingness. Yet here they are, forever trapped in their most violent moment, their conflict so potent it bleeds into our dimension. Their hatred, their fear, their final, explosive acts of defiance have become a permanent fixture of the galactic core, a repeating storm of consequence without cause. The danger is not that they see us and attack. The horror is that they do not see us at all. We are merely debris on their eternal battlefield, collateral damage in a conflict whose very memory has been erased from the universe. So we must ask, if an echo can kill you, what is the difference between a ghost and a living enemy? And what other moments of forgotten history might suddenly surge into our reality with the power to tear our ship apart? A silent, incandescent beam lanced from a phantom dreadnought and tore through the event horizon's hull. The breach alarms were a secondary concern. The primary horror unfolded on the bridge. Engineer Rin, who had been running a diagnostic near the impact point, convulsed. His form didn't burn or bleed. It began to flicker, his body dissolving into a faint, shimmering static before snapping back into focus, only to fade again. He was a faulty transmission, a signal losing its coherence. Captain, his biosigns are fluctuating wildly. He is not just injured, he is becoming unanchored from our timeline. Rin looked down at his own wavering hands, his eyes wide not with pain but with a terrifying, dawning awe. "I can see them," he whispered, his voice layered with distant echoes. Other places, other times, endless corridors of light. They are all so beautiful, they are calling to me. He reached out towards a bulkhead that was no longer entirely solid to him, his fingers passing through the metal as if it were mist. Then with one final, brilliant shimmer, he was gone. No sound, no flash, no residue. The space where he had stood was simply empty. The ship's internal sensors scanned the area frantically, but they found nothing. Not a trace of DNA, not a scrap of his suit's composite material. It was a perfect erasure. This was the ultimate proof. The ghosts were not harmless recordings. They were a tangible, lethal force. Their very presence, their residual energy, could overwrite a person's existence, pulling them out of our reality and into the churning chaos of the multiverse. Rin had not been killed. He had been unmade, his timeline severed and absorbed into the static of the core. The silence on the bridge was heavier than any explosion. The danger was no longer just from stray weapons fire. It was a fundamental corruption of reality itself. The ship was not just in a battlefield. It was sailing through a storm that could dissolve the very concept of its crew. One moment you are a person with a past, a future, a self. The next you are a flicker, a memory even your closest friends struggle to hold on to. What happens to a life that is retroactively deleted? Does the universe simply stitch over the hole you left behind, or does the wound remain, a subtle, aching wrongness that no one can quite place? The crew of the Event Horizon now had to face a fear deeper than death. They had to confront the possibility of never having existed at all. The silence on the bridge was a physical weight, broken only by the faint, persistent whispers threading through the calms. Captain Valerius stared at the empty space where his engineer had stood, the ghost of a man erased from his own timeline. We need answers, not more questions. Helm, scan the nearest derelicts. Look for anything with an intact data core, something that can tell us what we are really facing. It was Commander Lera, still aboard the ancient warship, who found it. Sealed in an armored vault deep within the vessel, a crystalline data core pulsed with a faint, stubborn light, its power source somehow still active after millennia. Her team carefully interfaced their equipment, the ancient systems groaning as they reluctantly surrendered their secrets. A flickering hologram materialized above the core, revealing a being with a slender, elongated skull and eyes filled with a profound, timeless sorrow. The voice that emerged was not a whisper but a clear, desperate recording translated by their systems in real time. "We were the Jar," it began, its tone heavy with regret. "We sought the ultimate power source, the engine at the heart of creation. We believed the core's energy could be tamed, could fuel an empire for eternity. We were fools." The hologram showed schematics of vast, impossible machines, ringed structures designed to latch onto the core's rift. We did not simply study the rupture. We attempted to widen it, to force it to obey our will. In our arrogance, we did not break a barrier. We fractured reality itself. The image dissolved into chaos, showing the Jar fleet caught in a storm of overlapping timelines, their ships flickering in and out of existence. The message continued, the being's voice fraying with remembered terror. "We are not ghosts of the dead. We are refugees trapped between the moments of our own failure. Our consciousness was ripped from the linear flow of time and anchored here in this loop, forced to eternally relive the cataclysm we caused. Every echo you see, every phantom ship, is a soul caught in the same eddy, a mind endlessly repeating its final, catastrophic mistake." The recording pleaded, a final warning cast across the ages. Do not attempt to speak to us. Do not try to interact. Your signal, your presence, it only reinforces the loop, deepening the fracture. You are not hearing our voices. You are hearing the scar we left upon the universe. The transmission ended, the hologram winking out and leaving them in the vault's profound silence. The realization was colder than the void outside. The graveyard was not a place of rest. It was a prison of infinite regret, and the haunting whispers were not an invitation, but the desperate, automated screams of the inmates, begging for someone, anyone, to stop feeding the machine of their eternal torment. What do you do when you discover that the most terrifying sound in the galaxy is not a threat, but a plea for you to turn away? That the very act of listening is what perpetuates the nightmare? The event horizon groaned, a deep metallic protest that vibrated through the deck plates. "Captain, the helm is not responding." The tactical officer's voice cut through the tension, sharp and urgent. "Our main engines are at maximum reverse thrust, but we are losing ground. Something is pulling us in." On the main viewer, the churning light of the galactic core swelled, no longer a distant spectacle but a voracious maw. It was not a simple gravitational pull. It felt sentient, a deliberate, crushing force. An engineer's frantic report echoed from the comms. "The power drain is impossible." It is not just pulling the ship, it is siphoning our energy, feeding on it. The core is alive and it is hungry. As he spoke, the temperature on the bridge plummeted. A visible frost began to creep across the consoles, crystalline patterns spreading with unnatural speed. Then came the hands. They materialized from the void outside, pressing against the main viewport. They were not solid, but neither were they mere light. Translucent and shimmering, they were the ghosts of countless lost crewmen, their faces contorted in silent screams. Their fingers, cold as the space between stars, scratched at the reinforced transparasteel. The sound was not one of impact, but of something far worse, a faint, desperate scrabbling, a tangible plea from beings trapped for eons. They were not trying to break in, they were trying to hold on, to use the event horizon as an anchor against the core's irresistible draw. What do you do when the void itself reaches out to touch you? When the whispers in the dark become physical hands clawing at your only protection, this was no longer a haunting, it was an assault. The ship was a caught fish, and the line was being reeled in by a fisher from a dimension beyond comprehension. The ghosts scratching at the glass were a terrifying omen. They were not the threat, they were the previous catch, and their fate was now being offered to the event horizon. Would they become just another set of spectral hands, forever scratching at the next ship to wander too close? The scrabbling of spectral hands against the viewport was suddenly drowned out by a new sound, a resonant hum that seemed to originate from the very air on the bridge. The frantic red emergency lights flickered, then steadied into a soft, ethereal glow. In the center of the command deck, the light coalesced, pulling itself from the ambient energy like mist rising from water. It formed the translucent figure of a being, its form clad in the ornate armor of a forgotten empire, a captain's sigil glowing faintly on its chest. Its face was lined with an age that transcended time, and its eyes held a sorrow so deep it felt like a physical chill. The crew stood frozen, their own terror momentarily forgotten in the presence of this impossible visitor. It did not flicker like the other echoes, it held its form with a terrible, stable clarity. Its gaze swept across them, and when it spoke, its voice was not a whisper from the calms, but a clear, resonant tone that vibrated in their bones. "You must leave this place," it said, each word imbued with a crushing weight of urgency. "You do not understand what you are doing. Your ship, your very life signs, are a dissonant chord in this fragile space. You are feeding the rupture." The figure raised a shimmering hand, gesturing towards the churning core on the viewer. The convergence approaches. It is a cyclical event, a moment when the barriers between all possible timelines grow paper-thin. When it peaks, they will not simply overlap. They will collapse into one another violently and permanently. A single, chaotic reality will be forged from the fragments of infinite histories. Your presence here, your attempts to communicate, are acting as a catalyst, accelerating the process beyond any precedent. A series of symbols, utterly alien yet instinctively understood, flashed across the main screen, a complex equation of cascading temporal energy spiraling towards a critical point. "You have started a chain reaction we cannot stop. You have until this countdown reaches zero. If you are still within the boundary of the core when the timelines merge, your reality, your past, your future will be unmade. You will become just another variable in the chaos, your existence rewritten into 1,000 contradictory possibilities." The ghostly captain's form began to destabilize, its edges dissolving back into the light from which it came. It was not a malevolent force, it was a warden, a final guardian trying to prevent a disaster it had failed to stop in its own time. It had not come to threaten them, but to offer a single, desperate chance at survival. Its final words hung in the air long after its form had vanished, a dire ultimatum from a ghost who had already witnessed the end of everything. What do you do with a warning from a being that should not exist, when the only hope for your entire timeline is to outrun a clock that measures the death of possibility itself? The ghost captain's warning dissolved into the air, leaving behind a silence more terrifying than any alarm. Then the ship shuddered, a violent tremor that had nothing to do with the core's pull. A console on the lower deck exploded in a shower of sparks. The damage control officer's voice was tight with confusion. "Captain, it was not a power surge. The conduit was manually overloaded from the inside. There was no one there." Across the event horizon, similar reports began to trickle in. A primary coolant line was severed by a severed access panel, the cutting torch left hovering in mid-air for a second before clattering to the deck. In the medbay, the chief surgeon watched in stunned horror as a shimmering, translucent version of himself calmly unplugged a critical life support system before fading through a solid wall. The phantoms were no longer just outside the ship. They were inside and they were wearing the faces of the crew. Panic, cold and insidious, began to spread faster than any system failure. The science officer stared at his scanner, his face pale as he watched the data stream. "They are not just echoes of the past," he whispered, the realization dawning with horrifying clarity. "The energy signatures are identical to our own, but out of phase. They are possibilities. They are us from other timelines, ones where we failed to escape. They are trying to ensure their own existence by making sure we share their fate." The logic was brutally circular and utterly terrifying. For a ghost from a doomed timeline to remain coherent, its past, this present moment, must inevitably lead to its creation. By sabotaging the ship, these phantom doubles were not acting out of malice, but out of a desperate, paradoxical need for self-preservation. They were ensuring the Event Horizon's destruction to validate their own tragic history. This understanding turned the crew against one another. Every shadow in the corridor seemed to hold a flickering duplicate. A friendly clap on the shoulder could be a solid hand one moment, and a cold, spectral mist the next. Who could you trust? The engineer working frantically to repair the engines, or the possibility that he might, at any second, be replaced by a version of himself whose only goal was to see those engines fail? Paranoia became a virus, and the ship itself was the host. The greatest threat was no longer outside the hull, but walking the halls beside them, wearing their own faces and fighting for a future that required everyone's doom. How do you fight an enemy that is, in every way, a reflection of your own potential failure? An enemy that knows every security code, every weakness, and every secret fear you hold. Captain Valerius stood alone in the corridor outside engineering, the air humming with the ghost of his own fear. The flickering form materialized not from the shadows but from the light itself, stepping out of a shimmering patch on the bulkhead. It was him, but aged by a grief he had not yet earned, his eyes holding the weight of 1,000 failed decisions. The phantom did not raise a weapon. It simply stood there, a mirror of a future that was desperately trying to become the present. "I tried to save my crew," it said, its voice a hollow echo of Valerius' own. "I saw the core as a threat to be destroyed. I channeled our ship's entire power core into a single, desperate blast meant to cauterize the wound in spacetime." The phantom's form wavered, a flicker of remembered cataclysm passing over its features. "My arrogance did not heal the rupture. It shattered the delicate balance holding it in check." The blast reverberated across dimensions, widening the tear and pulling in countless more timelines. "I am the one who created the fracture you see now. I am the ghost of your worst possible instinct." The admission hung in the air, a confession from a future self that condemned the present. The phantom captain gestured, and a schematic appeared between them, hovering in the air. It showed the event horizon, a tiny speck against the maelstrom of the core. "You stand at the same precipice. You have two paths, and both demand an impossible price. The first is sacrifice. You can overload your own quantum drive at the precise epicenter of the fracture. The resulting implosion would, in theory, create a temporary singularity that could seal the rupture. It would work, but the ship and everyone on it would be annihilated, your atoms scattered across the multiverse as a permanent seal. The second path is far more dangerous. You can attempt a stabilization procedure, using the ship's systems to emit a counter-frequency to the core's resonance. It would be like trying to calm a hurricane with a whisper. If you succeed, you could temporarily reinforce the barriers between timelines, giving all realities a chance to pull back from the brink. But if you fail, if your calculations are off by even a fraction, the resulting feedback will not just destroy you. It will complete the convergence instantly, collapsing every possible reality into one chaotic, screaming moment of existence. The phantom looked at him, a perfect reflection of his own face contorted by a terrible, intimate knowledge. "In my timeline, I chose the path of violence and doomed us all. In this one, you must find another way. The choice is not between life and death. It is between a clean end and the potential to end everything." How do you weigh your crew's lives against the entire tapestry of existence? And when the voice urging caution is the ghost of your own greatest failure, can you trust its warning, or is it just another part of the trap? The phantom of his future self dissolved, leaving only the terrible weight of its confession. Across the main viewer, the chaotic ballet of ghost ships shifted. The warring factions, locked in their eternal conflict, suddenly broke apart. Their silent vessels wheeled in a new, terrifyingly precise formation, merging into a single, unified armada. Hundreds of spectral warships from every conceivable era of spacefaring history fell into a defensive perimeter around the churning heart of the core. They are not attacking each other anymore. The tactical officer's voice was a mixture of awe and dread. They are forming a blockade. They are protecting something. This was not a random resonance or a reenacted battle. This was a coordinated defense. The Ghost Fleet, a collection of souls from 1,000 shattered timelines, had set aside their ancient grudges for a single, unified purpose. They were guarding the source of the dimensional fracture itself. Their formation was impenetrable, a layered wall of shimmering hulls and silent, waiting weapons. It was a shield made of the damned, a barrier of lost possibilities standing guard over the wound in reality. Why would echoes, mere recordings of the past, act with such clear, unified intent? The answer redefines our understanding of their existence. They are not mindless recordings. They are a collective consciousness, a gestalt intelligence forged from infinite regret. Their shared failure, the cataclysm that trapped them all, created a single, overriding directive to prevent anyone from repeating their mistake. They are not guarding a treasure or a power source. They are guarding the lock on a door that should never be opened again. The very thing that destroyed them is the thing they now protect from further interference. Think of a body forming a scab over a deep wound. The Ghost Fleet is that scab, a painful but necessary barrier sealing the rupture. Their deadly intent is not born of malice but of a desperate, cosmic immune response. They will destroy any new infection, any ship that comes too close, because the alternative, another Jar-like attempt to manipulate the core, would mean the total unraveling of everything. They are the guardians of last resort, and their only law is absolute quarantine. What could be so dangerous, so fundamentally wrong, that it would unite the ghosts of 1,000,000 years of warfare? What lies at the center of that maelstrom that is worse than the eternal torment they already endure? The formation of the Ghost Fleet Armada is not an attack, it is the final warning. It is the universe itself drawing a line in the sand and saying, "Go no further." The question for Captain Valerius is no longer about escape, but about whether he can respect that boundary, or if his next move will force him to become the very infection the ghosts are sworn to destroy. The Ghost Fleet's defensive formation was an unbreakable wall of shimmering intent, but every defense has a weakness. The key lay in the ancient Jar warning, buried within their final, desperate transmission. The chief engineer's voice crackled over the internal comm, charged with a fragile, electrifying hope. "Captain, I have it, the data core from the derelict. It describes the nature of the temporal echoes. They are anchored to a specific moment in the timeline, resonating at a fixed frequency. If we can disrupt that resonance, we can pass through them." He pulled up a complex energy waveform on the bridge screen. They are vulnerable to chronoton particles. These are theoretical particles that interact with the flow of time itself. If we modify our shield emitters to emit a field of chronoton radiation, it should, in theory, dephase their forms. We would become out of sync with their reality, passing through their fleet like a whisper through a wall. The proposal hung in the air, a thread of possibility in a room thick with despair. It was a gamble built on a ghost's confession and a dead civilization's data, a solution that sounded more like science fiction than a viable tactic. But the alternative was to sit and wait for the convergence to erase them from history. The chief's face was grimly determined. The modifications are possible, but they were never designed for this. We would have to reroute primary power through the shield grid and recalibrate the emitters in real time as we move. One miscalculation, one surge, and we would not just lose the shields, we would vaporize the ship. This was not a simple engineering task. It was a high-wire act over an abyss, performed while the wire itself was on fire. The crew scrambled, a symphony of controlled chaos. Conduits were overloaded, systems were jury-rigged with parts never meant to work together, and every alarm was a constant reminder of the ticking clock. They were trying to re-engineer the fundamental nature of their ship's defenses while flying directly toward an armada of the damned. What does it feel like to stake your entire existence on a theory? To pour every ounce of your hope into a plan that, according to all known physics, should be impossible? The crew of the Event Horizon had no other choice. They were not just fighting for their lives anymore. They were fighting for their right to have ever existed at all, racing to finish their work before the countdown reached zero and all of reality collapsed into a single, silent scream. The Event Horizon slid through the ghost fleet like a shadow through a dream. The chronoton field shimmered around the hull, a fragile bubble of altered time that made the phantoms ripple and distort as they passed. One moment a colossal dreadnought filled the viewer, its silent guns trained on them, and the next the ship was simply a wash of insubstantial light, parting around their shields without a whisper of resistance. They had become ghosts to the ghosts, a paradox sailing through a graveyard of paradoxes. Then, as suddenly as it began, the chaos ended. They passed through the final layer of the spectral blockade and emerged into a perfect, impossible silence. The churning light, the screaming whispers, the endless storm of overlapping realities, it all vanished. They were floating in the center of the galactic core, inside a sphere of pristine, stable space no larger than a small solar system. And at its very heart hung a single, solitary structure. It was a station, but its design was unlike anything in known history. It was not built for human proportions or aesthetics. It resembled a vast, intricate lattice of black crystal and polished obsidian, its surfaces catching the distant, filtered light of the core in a way that suggested it was drinking the light, not reflecting it. Spires spiraled from its central body like frozen lightning bolts, and deep within its translucent structure, faint pulses of energy traveled along crystalline pathways, a slow, rhythmic heartbeat. "Captain," the science officer breathed, his voice hushed in the profound quiet. "We are reading a perfectly stable environment. No temporal distortions, no energy fluctuations. It is a sanctuary, but the structure itself, its age is incalculable. It predates the Jar. It predates every civilization we have on record. This is not a ruin. It is the source, the original breach." The realization settled over the bridge, colder than the void outside. They were not looking at a monument to a disaster. They were looking at the disaster itself, the patient zero of the galactic core's infection. This station, built by a race so ancient their name was lost to time, was the first to poke a hole in the fabric of reality. They were the ones who opened the door that the Jar later tried to kick down, the ones who started the chain reaction of echoes and fractures that now threatened to consume everything. What kind of beings would build such a thing? Were they explorers seeking knowledge from beyond the veil? Were they conquerors trying to annex other dimensions? Or were they simply fools like all who came after them, who reached for a power they could not hope to control? The station hung in the silence, a beautiful, terrible artifact. It was the lock on the door, the first stitch in a wound that had never healed. And now the Event Horizon was drifting directly toward its docking ports. The obsidian docking tube extended from the Event Horizon to the station's airlock with a deep, resonant clang that echoed through the hollow silence. Inside, the air was cold and still, tasting of ancient metal and static. Commander Lyra led the way, her team's footsteps swallowed by the vast, crystalline corridors. There were no consoles, no viewports, no signs of life. The entire structure felt less like a habitat and more like a machine or a tomb. The walls themselves seemed to be watching, the faint pulses of light within the black crystal tracing their progress like a slow, curious heartbeat. They followed the internal energy signature to the very center of the lattice, entering a chamber so vast its ceiling was lost in shadow. In the center of the cavernous space, suspended in a cage of shimmering, golden light, was the architect. It was not a creature of flesh and blood. It was a vortex of swirling energy, a miniature galaxy of thoughts and memories given form, its light muted and strained by the containment field that held it. A voice, soft and layered with the weight of eons, spoke directly into their minds. "You have come. I am the last of my kind, we who built this place." We called ourselves the Unity. We sought to bridge the dimensions, to weave all possible timelines into a single, perfect tapestry of existence. We dreamed of a universe without conflict, without loss, a reality where every choice and its opposite could coexist in harmony. The energy being pulsed with a dim, sorrowful light, but we were arrogant. Our first attempt to synchronize the timelines did not create unity, it created a fracture. A single, catastrophic dissonance that shattered the delicate balance we sought to master. The energy vortex convulsed, and for a moment the chamber walls flickered, showing a terrifying vista of infinite realities tearing themselves apart. The ghosts you have witnessed, the echoes that haunt this graveyard, they are not the souls of the dead. They are the fragments of my own failed ambition. Every ship, every lost crew is a piece of the cataclysm I set in motion, a splinter of the single, terrible moment my dream died. Their endless loops are my eternal punishment, a constant replay of the moment I broke the universe. The being's voice grew strained, pleading, "This station is not a machine, it is a prison, my prison. The containment field you see was not made to protect me from the outside. It was my final, desperate act to prevent the fracture from consuming all of reality. I am the anchor, the focal point that contains the damage, but my strength wanes with each passing cycle. The convergence you fear is the final failure of my will. You must understand, you cannot fix what I have broken. You can only end it. You must destroy the station." The architect's form flickered violently. "Collapsing the physical structure will sever my connection to the fracture. The resulting implosion will pull every echo, every ghost, every splintered timeline back into the singularity of this moment. It will be a final, merciful silence. It is the only way to heal the wound." The plea hung in the air, a confession from a godlike being who had become the warden of its own hell. To save the universe, they were being asked to become executioners, to extinguish a consciousness that had witnessed the birth of stars, all to erase the terrible mistake it had made. How do you weigh a single, ancient life against the screaming chaos of infinite tormented echoes? And if you agree, are you performing an act of mercy? Or are you simply completing a tragedy that began before your world was born? Commander Lyra stared at the shimmering vortex, the architect's plea echoing in her mind. Back on the Event Horizon's bridge, she relayed the grim ultimatum, her voice hollow over the calms. "We have to destroy the station. It is the only way to collapse the fracture." For a moment, there was only the hum of the ship's systems. Then First Officer Kale shook his head, his face etched with a profound and sudden horror. "No, we cannot. You are talking about genocide." The silence on the bridge deepened, the weight of his words settling over the crew. He turned to face Captain Valerius, his eyes pleading. "Those temporal refugees, those echoes, they are not malfunctions, they are living beings. They have consciousness, memory, a sense of self, however fractured. They are trapped, yes, but they exist. We cannot become the instrument of their final, absolute erasure." The moral abyss they now faced was more terrifying than any physical threat. The architect saw its own existence as a mistake to be corrected, a single, ancient life to be traded for universal stability. But Kale was right. The Ghost Fleet was not a collection of errors. It was a civilization of the lost, a diaspora of souls from a million broken timelines. To destroy the station was to commit an act of cosmic murder on an unimaginable scale. How do you measure the salvation of reality against the annihilation of countless sentient lives? Is a clean, silent universe worth the price of becoming the universe's greatest executioner? The crew was suddenly divided, not by rank but by conscience. Some saw the logic of the architect's solution, a necessary, terrible surgery to save the patient. Others sided with Kale, unable to accept a victory painted in the blood of trillions of trapped minds. They were not just deciding their own fate, they were deciding who had the right to exist. Captain Valerius looked from the main viewer, showing the silent, beautiful prison station to the faces of his crew. He saw the same conflict reflected in every pair of eyes. The architect offered them a simple, brutal choice, a button that would end the nightmare. But Kale had shown them the faces of everyone who would die when they pressed it. There had to be another way, a third option that did not demand such a monstrous price. The question was no longer about how to survive, but about what kind of survivors they would be if they did. Could they live with themselves if their freedom was built on a foundation of infinite graves? The silence on the bridge was a fragile thing, shattered by the frantic work of the science team. They delved deeper into the JAR data core, cross-referencing it with the station's own dormant architecture. The chief scientist's voice cut through the tension, not with a solution, but with a revelation that redefined the entire problem. The station was never a weapon. Its original design was for stabilization. The Unity did not want to break reality. They sought to heal its natural fractures, to provide a framework where overlapping timelines could coexist without annihilating each other. They failed, but their tools remain. We can complete their work. We can use the station's primary systems to emit a universal synchronization frequency. The idea was staggering in its implications. The procedure would not destroy the Ghost Fleet. It would grant them asylum. The chaotic energy of the echoes would be woven into the fabric of our own timeline, giving them stable, permanent form. The screaming phantoms would become silent neighbors. The warring ships would become monuments in the void. It would end their torment and heal the wound in space-time all at once. But the cost was absolute. The synchronization requires a constant, living consciousness to act as the anchor. A single mind must forever interface with the station's core, a permanent bridge between our reality and all the others. That person would become the new linchpin, the living heart of the stabilized dimensions. They would never leave. They would watch as their crewmates departed, and then remain alone in the silent core, forever holding the door open so the ghosts could finally come home. Who would make that choice? Who would volunteer to become a permanent part of the galactic core, a living legend and a permanent prisoner, all to save both the living and the dead? This was not a sacrifice of life, but of a lifetime. It was an eternity of solitude traded for universal peace. The protocol offered a path of creation, not destruction, but it demanded a price more personal and profound than any explosion. One soul would have to stay behind so that countless others could finally rest. A shimmering light coalesced beside the captain's chair, resolving into the form of the ghostly Valerius. His face, no longer a mask of despair, held a grim and startling resolve. "Let me be the anchor," he said, his voice clear and resonant in the hushed bridge. "My timeline is already lost, my existence a monument to failure, but this is my chance for redemption. In the final moments of my reality's collapse, a handful of us achieved a terrible clarity. We are not just echoes repeating a mistake. We are the mistake made conscious, and we seek to atone." The phantom looked at his living counterpart, a shared history passing between them in a single glance. The synchronization requires a consciousness that understands the fracture from the inside, one that is already woven into its chaotic pattern. I am that. Let my eternal vigil be the penance for the cataclysm I caused. This changes everything. The ghosts are not merely victims trapped in a loop. A fraction of them have become self-aware, their endless repetition forging a new kind of sentience born from infinite regret. They are not just screaming into the void, they are listening and they are learning. They have spent eons witnessing the consequences of their actions, and now they seek to use their cursed existence to mend the wound they helped create. What does redemption mean for a being that is itself a memory of a failure? It means taking the substance of your own tragedy and forging it into a tool for salvation. The Phantom Captain is volunteering to become the permanent heart of the station, not as a punishment but as a choice. He is seizing the one opportunity his tormented existence has granted him to ensure no other timeline suffers the fate of his own. His sacrifice would be a paradox, a ghost saving the living by volunteering for an eternity of solitude, finally giving purpose to a meaningless loop. Can a ghost find peace by embracing its own nature as a warning? The answer now rests on whether the living crew can accept this offer and trust the very reflection of their own failure to secure their future. The ghost's offer hung in the air, a shimmering promise of redemption, but the universe did not wait for their decision. A deafening roar tore through the ship, a sound that was not sound, the shriek of spacetime itself being flayed alive. The event horizon bucked violently, and the main viewer dissolved into a kaleidoscope of screaming contradictions. A forest of ancient trees grew through the bridge consoles, their roots sinking into the deck plates, while a city of impossible spires flickered in and out of existence around them. The air tasted of ozone, salt water, and burning plastic all at once. We are out of time. The convergence is here. Multiple timelines are collapsing into one. We have minutes before everything becomes a single, chaotic moment. The chief engineer's voice was a raw shout over the cacophony. The careful plan, the moral debate, it all vaporized in the face of this immediate existential dissolution. They had to act now. The synchronization protocol was their only chance, and it had to be initiated immediately, no matter the risk. The ghostly Valerius did not wait for permission. His form blazed with incandescent light, flowing like liquid starfire towards the station's core. The living captain gave a single, sharp nod. Do it. Initiate the protocol. Now on the bridge, the crew worked in a frenzy, rerouting every ounce of power to the station's ancient systems. The procedure was a dangerous, untested theory, a desperate attempt to impose a single, stable frequency onto the screaming chaos of a dying multiverse. It was like trying to conduct a symphony while the concert hall collapsed into a black hole. The station's crystalline lattice began to pulse, a deep, resonant hum that fought against the dissonant roar of the convergence. For a terrifying moment, nothing happened. The overlapping realities pressed in closer, the air thickening with the ghosts of cities and oceans and wars that had never been. Then a single, pure tone cut through the noise. It was the synchronization frequency, a note of perfect order woven from the ghost captain's own consciousness. The effect was not an explosion but a calming. The screaming contradictions did not vanish, they softened. The forest on the bridge became translucent, its ancient trees now standing as silent, beautiful echoes alongside the solid consoles. The Phantom City spires became a permanent, ghostly skyline outside the viewport. The chaotic maelstrom of the core began to slow, its furious churning settling into a gentle, luminous swirl. The ghost fleet, once a wall of aggressive intent, now drifted in a peaceful, silent armada, their forms stable and clear. They were no longer fighting. They were simply present. The stabilization was working, but at what cost? The station's core now glowed with a steady, brilliant light, and at its center, they could feel the permanent, solitary presence of the ghost, the new anchor holding the door between realities forever open. He had traded his endless loop for an endless vigil. The immediate crisis was over, but the ship was still adrift in a newly forged reality, a place where the lines between what was, what is, and what might have been were now permanently blurred. What kind of universe have they just created? One saved from annihilation, but forever haunted by its own possibilities. The new silence of the core was a fragile thing, and it shattered in an instant. A war horn, ancient and brutal, blasted through the comms, a sound that carried the dust of 1,000,000 battlefields. Across the main viewer, a third of the newly stabilized Ghost Fleet broke formation. Their ships, all jagged edges and glowing weapons, turned not towards the event horizon, but towards the station itself. Their energy signatures swelled with a single, aggressive intent. Captain, a faction of the Echoes is refusing the synchronization. The tactical officer's voice was tight. They are led by warlike cultures from timelines where conflict was the only constant. They see the convergence not as an end, but as a beginning. A universe remade by chaos is a universe they can conquer. Before anyone could respond, the air on the bridge crackled. Translucent figures in barbed armor materialized from the light itself, phasing through the bulkheads. They were not the mournful phantoms they had seen before. These were warriors, their forms solidified by pure aggression, and they raised spectral blades that hummed with disruptive energy. "They do not want peace," the tactical officer shouted, drawing his sidearm. "They want the convergence to complete. They want to create a universe where their warrior culture dominates all others." The battle was no longer a metaphor. Phantom boarding parties materialized in engineering, in the mess hall, in the corridors. They moved with a chilling purpose, their goal clear: to stop the synchronization procedure by any means necessary. They fought not to destroy the ship, but to reclaim their chaos. For them, the stable, unified reality being born was a prison worse than death. It was a universe without conquest, without the struggle that defined their very existence. How do you fight an enemy that believes salvation is a fate worse than oblivion? An enemy that would rather see all of reality burn than live in a world without war. The Event Horizon's crew found themselves defending a fragile new peace against the ghosts of wars that refused to die. The bridge dissolved into a storm of shimmering steel and screaming phantoms. Commander Lyra fired her sidearm, the energy blast passing harmlessly through a warrior's chest only for the spectre to reform an instant later, its blade slicing through a console with terrifying solidity. "We cannot fight them with weapons," she shouted over the din. "They are solidified thought, and their thought is conquest." From the engineering deck, the chief's voice was a ragged scream over the comms. "Captain, the feedback is catastrophic. We are losing containment. The synchronization frequency is creating a massive energy backlash, and it is tearing the ship apart from the inside. Conduits are overloading all across the lower decks. We have minutes before the core breaches." Captain Valerius watched the main viewer, where the peaceful, stabilized ghosts were now locked in a silent, desperate struggle with their warlike brethren. The station at the center of it all pulsed erratically, the ghost of his other self straining to hold the line. The choice was no longer theoretical. It was a simple equation of physics and sacrifice. He opened a ship-wide channel, his voice cutting through the chaos with a terrible, calm finality. "All hands abandon ship. Initiate emergency evacuation protocols. Get to the life pods." He turned to his helmsman. "Reroute all remaining power, including life support and emergency systems, directly to the station's synchronization matrix. We are going to use the Event Horizon herself as the final power source." The helmsman's hands flew across his console, his face pale. "Sir, that will trigger a total core overload the moment the last of the power transfers." "It will be a matter of seconds, I know," Valerius said, his eyes fixed on the station. "Make the transfer." For a moment, the ship fell into an eerie, suspended silence. The battle seemed to pause as every light on the bridge blazed with impossible brilliance, all the power of a starship's heart flowing out in one final, concentrated surge towards the alien lattice. The Event Horizon shuddered, a deep, groaning death rattle that vibrated through the bones of every remaining crew member. Then the ship detonated. It was not a fireball of destruction, but a silent, expanding wave of pure white light. The radiance washed over the warring ghost fleets, over the station, over the very fabric of the core. Where it touched, the aggressive phantoms did not vanish. They softened, their weapons dissolving, their furious postures relaxing into postures of awe and remembrance. The light was the ultimate synchronization, a wave of peace bought with the complete annihilation of the vessel that had carried them here. In the new, profound quiet, the stabilized core shone with a gentle, permanent luminescence. The ghosts, all of them, now rested in their places, a silent, beautiful armada of memories and possibilities. The event horizon was gone, but its final act had woven its own story into the tapestry of the galactic core, a permanent echo of sacrifice that finally brought peace to the dead. The Phantom Captain's form blazed with the light of a newborn star, his being flowing into the crystalline lattice of the station. "I am the bridge now," his voice echoed, not through the air, but within their very minds, a final declaration of purpose. The anchor between all timelines, go before the energy wave consumes you. As he spoke, his translucent body solidified, becoming a permanent, radiant statue at the heart of the machine, a fixed point in the churning chaos. Throughout the core, the violent, screaming light began to slow, its chaotic swirls calming into a gentle, luminous whirlpool. The stabilization field was activating, a wave of order radiating from the station, and the event horizon was the epicenter of the backlash. The deck plates heaved, and a roar built from the ship's dying reactor, promising utter annihilation. There was no more time for goodbyes, only the desperate, scrambling flight towards the last remaining life pods, the final exodus from a vessel that had become a bomb. What is the last sound a ship makes before it dies? Not an explosion, but the groan of metal surrendering to forces it was never meant to contain. A final, deep-throated sigh as its heart tears itself apart. The crew escaped into the silent, newborn calm, leaving behind the ghost of their captain and the shell of their ship, two sacrifices to buy a single, fragile chance at a future. They had saved all of reality, but the cost was written in the empty chairs of their escape pods and the permanent, silent sentinel now standing watch in the galactic heart. The brilliant wave of light faded, leaving behind a profound and impossible stillness. Where the event horizon had once floated, only shimmering dust remained, a final memorial to the ship's sacrifice. Then the science officer's voice broke the silence, trembling with a reverence that bordered on fear. "The ghosts, they are becoming real." Across the viewer, the spectral fleet began to solidify. The phantom ships, once translucent echoes of forgotten wars and lost voyages, were gaining substance, their shimmering hulls hardening into polished metal and strange composites. The silent, screaming phantoms on their bridges slowly filled with color and texture, their forms knitting together from memory and light into flesh and blood. They were no longer echoes, they were a people reborn. This was not an invasion, it was a resurrection. The warlike factions, their weapons now inert and integrated into their new, physical forms, looked upon their own hands with a stunned confusion. The chaotic energy of the convergence had been transformed by the synchronization wave into a creative force, weaving the raw potential of infinite timelines into a single, stable reality. The temporal refugees were not just being saved from erasure, they were being granted a second chance at existence, a permanent home built from the fabric of their own collective past. What does it mean to be given a body after an eternity as a thought, to feel the solid weight of a tool in your hand after millennia of passing through walls? The crew of the escape pods watched, humbled, as a new civilization was born before their eyes. A crystalline jar explorer reached out and touched the hull of its own ship, the gesture slow and deliberate, a tangible connection to a world it had only been able to haunt. A warrior from a brutal empire simply stood on the bridge of his dreadnought, staring at his own reflection in a console, perhaps seeing a face he had not worn in 100,000 years. They were all refugees here, every one of them granted asylum in a universe that now had a place for them. The core itself had transformed. The violent, churning maelstrom was gone, replaced by a calm, luminous whirlpool of soft gold and blue energy, a beautiful and serene beacon at the heart of the galaxy. The station at its center pulsed with a gentle, steady rhythm, the Ghost Captain's eternal vigil now the heartbeat of this new, unified realm. He had not just prevented a catastrophe. He had midwifed a genesis. The graveyard of ships was no longer a graveyard. It was a metropolis. The derelicts and phantoms, now solid and whole, drifted in a peaceful, organized lattice, their lights twinkling like the windows of a city that spanned solar systems. The haunting whispers that had once chilled the soul were replaced by the faint, hopeful hum of a billion different lives beginning again. The question hanging in the air was no longer about survival, but about legacy. What happens when the ghosts in the machine are finally set free? The escape pod drifted through a silent sea of newborn stars. Its hull was scarred, its power reserves critically low, but it carried a cargo more precious than any treasure, the last survivors of the event horizon. They were not the same people who had entered the core. A quiet solemnity had settled over them, a shared understanding that they were now living on borrowed time in a universe they had helped remake. First Officer Kale stared out the viewport at the receding galactic center, now a gentle, golden swirl. "We did not destroy the ghosts," he murmured, his voice barely a whisper. "We gave them a future," as if in answer, their long-range comms, patched together from salvaged components, crackled to life. The signals were faint, woven from a dozen different languages, some ancient, some utterly alien, but the meaning was translated with perfect, heartbreaking clarity. "Thank you," the voices whispered, not with the lonely ache of before, but with a profound, trembling hope. "Thank you for the second chance." These were not the desperate pleas of trapped echoes. They were the first, tentative words of a civilization taking its first breath. A Jar scientist shared a fragment of a new stellar cartography. A warrior from a forgotten empire transmitted a simple, peaceful greeting. Each message was a thread in the fabric of a new society being woven from the ashes of infinite failures. The crew listened, their own grief for their captain and their ship momentarily eased by a dawning sense of awe. They were not returning as conquerors or heroes. They were going home as witnesses. How do you explain the impossible to those who have never left the safety of a single timeline? How do you describe watching ghosts become people, or a wound in reality transform into a cradle for new life? Their journey back would be long, a limping retreat across the vast gulf of the galaxy. But they carried with them the most important cargo of all, not data or artifacts, but a story. A story that the most terrifying thing in the universe was not the void, but the regret trapped within it, and that the most powerful force was not destruction, but the courage to offer a hand to the lost. What song will the galaxy sing now that its heart has found a new, peaceful rhythm? And what happens when the echoes we once feared become our distant neighbors among the stars? The soft blue curve of Earth filled the escape pod's viewport, a sight they had feared they would never see again. Captain Valerius sat before a salvaged recorder, its faint red light the only witness to his final log. His voice was quiet, worn thin by the long journey home and the weight of memory. "We are returning to a world that knows only one timeline," he began, "but we carry the truth of a million others." The ghosts of the galactic core were not specters to be feared, but lost souls seeking redemption. He paused, his gaze fixed on the distant, tranquil stars. "We went there as explorers and became witnesses. We thought we were confronting a monster, only to find it was a cry for help from the depths of time itself. And in helping them find their place, we may have just ensured peace across multiple dimensions for generations to come. The core is quiet now, a gentle beacon where a wound once festered, its silent, thriving metropolis a testament to the power of mercy over destruction. But we will never forget the echoes we brought to life." The log entry ended, the recorder clicking off. The silence in the pod was profound. They were the sole bearers of a story that would redefine humanity's place in the cosmos, not as masters of the universe, but as humble participants in a symphony of realities. What legacy will we build now that we know we are not alone in the vast, echoing dark?